Hey, James. Good morning for me and good evening to you.
Hello, how are you?
Doing pretty well. Both getting actually wrapped up this week to go on a short vacation, and then of course we're build next week, as I'm sure your
Oh,
everybody in
yes.
the MVP community is quite excited for. So yeah, I'm doing pretty well. I think there's been a couple of exciting few months and things for next week. So
Yep, it's an exciting time. Exciting time. But we can't talk
exactly.
about all of that yet. We've got to
No,
wait
no.
till
Well, we
next
can
week.
talk about the fact that we're excited. That is the thing that we can talk
Can
about.
talk
Yep.
about that. Exactly.
I'll just say one other thing for that. It's one of
Mm.
the few times that I've seen this many C-suite people from like Satya to Arun and Amir all like tweeting and doing social media
Mm.
posts, just saying how excited they are to be talking about cool things in a couple of weeks. So or next week technically. So I've not seen that before at too many other conferences where that many C-suite people are like, you guys really should pay attention to what we're saying. So like I think it is cool that they're even trying to get their own excitement generated from the community for announcements.
Yeah, exactly. Big things next week. Looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But digressions aside, I'm glad to finally get you on. I feel like you've certainly been someone, especially with your custom visual built as long as it has been, and that took longer than expected to get on, and I'm happy to finally have you on because I've used your visual quite extensively, and I mean it's almost second nature to say when anybody asks for like what's a map. No, I don't even need to know what the question is. If you're just asking about what map visual should I use for any reason, for the most part, it's going to be the icon map. Like it can pretty much do whatever you will need to do better and free versus all the other stuff. So I've definitely been trumpeting it for years as a very good quality visual out there. And I'm happy to finally get a deep dive onto that and to finally get you on because I know you've had a few things happening in your life in the last few years and everything. So it's happy to finally have you on the
Yes.
show. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to stop injuring myself so I can actually do stuff like this. But yeah, here now.
If you
So
don't
yeah.
mind, like just maybe for people who might be curious, is there any part of like that you'd be willing to share, just maybe what's happened in the last couple of years with you, or
Yeah, I can do. It's not
yeah,
um sounds a bit ridiculous looking back at it, but yeah, I fell off my bike, mountain bike, not even going particularly fast or anything like that, but I managed to cause myself quite a nasty injury to my hip, basically degloved my hip, all separated, and it took 3 or 4 operations to fix over quite a few months. So obviously, it's not the sort of place you want to hurt. It actually meant that I couldn't
yeah.
really sit down for the best part of a year or sleep. So it was yeah, just as we were coming out of COVID. So I think I
Mm-hmm.
had 2 difficult years, and then not being able to do any exercise or really move around particularly comfortably. Um, yeah, but yeah,
Yeah,
all
and I mean
that's behind me now, and all good.
and I've seen you at a couple conferences at this point. You seem to be fully recovered on that. But I do know, like, there's been a few times the last couple of years that I've reached out and you're just like, I would love to do community involvement stuff, but I'm not in a particularly healthy spot to be able to do much
Yeah,
interactions with the community. So it's been nice to see you kind of get back involved, see you at a lot of the conferences and everything else at the MVP summit. So I'm glad you're fully back into the gig and
oh
the
yeah,
travel routines. Yeah,
yeah, fully back on it now. Yeah.
excellent. I think to close off that as well, do you want to give a little background about yourself and who you are, involvement with Avanade and all that, to get the
Yeah, sure.
people on the channel an introduction to you?
Yep, of course, yep. So, if you don't know me, obviously I'm James Dales, based in the UK, just outside of London. Uh, I'm the global Power BI lead for Avanade. Avanade's a big global Microsoft consultancy. Been working with Power BI since pretty much the day it was born, and in its previous incarnations as well. Background in SQL Server, and before that in website development. So it's kind of where the custom visual skills come in, which also meant that back in 2019, I think it was, I was lucky enough to spend some time over at Microsoft in Seattle and got to play with the Power BI code base itself and build some of the
Mhm.
functionality that we see in the product today. So if you've used the KPI visual or some of the conditional formatting in the table and matrix visuals, then there's a good chance that you've experienced my dodgy code already. Obviously Microsoft MVP, and one of the co-leaders of the London Power BI user group. So that's probably my main, well, icon map aside, my main impact in the community over here in the UK is London Power BI user group.
Yeah, and I think I believe it last year. I misremember, but I've either been invited to present there. I'm pretty sure I presented there once at some point. But I know that you have a pretty healthy amount of attendees, both back in when you were doing in person, and then as well online.
Yeah, I remember you. Pretty sure you presented for us online in the middle of COVID.
That's right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, pretty sure. But but we're back in person, and quite pleased to be back in person, because there's plenty of online YouTube content now, like your great channel. So it doesn't need the likes of us doing online content as well. So we get somewhere between 50 and 100 people each month turn up in central London and have some great speakers on.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. And it's been around for quite a few years, I think now, hasn't it?
It has. In fact, we're meeting next week for our 7th birthday. So it'll be 7 years next week.
I guess so. You started pretty soon right after Power BI came out, then, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yep. Yeah, it's definitely the same year. Yeah, I wasn't involved in the beginning, but yeah, Prathi Kamasani was one of those that kicked it all off 7 years ago.
I'm glad that it's gone on as long as it had, and I think with everything, they evolved to online streaming and all that during COVID, which I think has kept a lot of the stuff alive and breathing. I mean, that's why I did my live stream to begin with, and now it's 112 streams and going strong. So it's nice to connect with people even when you can't see them in person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have you online stuff as well. Hence why I'm here today.
Well, exactly, yeah, and talking about maps and everything else, and some interesting questions that we'll get to, I'm sure, during the examples. But we talked earlier that you basically just have a lot of fun demos and things to show with the icon map and everything else. And if you're ready to get started, I can kind of flip over and we can start exploring it.
Let's do it. Yeah, so I've got no slides or PowerPoint or anything like that. Nobody wants to sit and watch PowerPoint, do they? So I thought we'd get straight into doing some map demos. I thought, let's just spend the rest of the time and build some maps together. And I thought I'd start with one of my favorite data sets, which the reason I kind of fall back to this one. This is one of the reasons that kicked icon map off and my journey in maps in Power BI off in the first place. Was needing to create a map in Power BI, but not put circles on it, but be able to put images instead, to be able to do some asset tracking. So this data is all about aeroplanes. So this isn't a public data set. Excuse me. To get hold of this data, I've used the API from the website FlightAware, and FlightAware track the locations of all the planes as they're flying around the planet, and they can make that data available in an API. So over a 24-hour period, I called that API using a little .NET script that I wrote every 2 minutes and recorded the location of every single plane that was, in this case, either flying into or out of Amsterdam, and stored it in a load of CSV files and have loaded it into my Power BI model. So I'll probably show you that data. Relatively straightforward. So we have this time bracket field, which is our 2-minute intervals. Then we've got the flight number of the plane. Ignore some of these. We've got the where it's flying from, where it's flying to, and we've got things like the altitude, the speed, longitude and latitude, importantly, so where that plane is, and its heading, so which direction it's pointing at. And we'll come back to the waypoints field in a minute. So let's start by having a look at putting that on the map. Now, obviously, we've got plenty of choices for maps in Power BI. We've got the ArcGIS maps from Esri. We've got the Bing map, we've got field map, we've got shape map, and we've got the most recent edition, Azure Maps. And I know Microsoft have made their desire fairly public now to retire some of these older visuals and incorporate all of that functionality into Azure Maps. But
I think it's just their end goal is to really pretty much just have that be because there's what
yeah,
six or seven, maybe not. It's probably like 5 or 6 like collective maps that they have.
Yeah, we've got these ones. Yeah, we've got these five map visuals. I don't think ArcGIS Maps is going away because that's not created by Microsoft. That's created by a company called Esri, who are a specialist mapping company. That's going nowhere. But the field map and the map visual are based on the much older Bing Maps technology. And so I think the desire is to retire those and replace it with Azure Maps. And then we've also got which has been in preview now for well, over 6 years, let's say. So the desire is to incorporate all of that functionality into the Azure Maps visual. But even once that's happened, we still can't put an icon or a picture on a map. So even with all of that work that Microsoft's doing, there's still going to be a need, as there is with all of the visuals. If you need to do something a little bit different, then we have the benefit in Power BI of being able to turn to custom visuals. So custom visuals, for anybody who's not aware, you can add onto your report by clicking on these 3 dots. And as long as it's enabled in your organization, you can go to get more visuals. And we have this fantastic library of additional visuals. Admittedly, of varying quality. You need to be a little bit careful with these. Some of them are pretty poor, but some of them are really excellent.
Thankfully, the reviews do help quite a bit. They have made the store a lot better. You have the store by popularity, you have the comments and reviews, and I do think it's easier to now navigate and find. Plus, also download the example workbooks. But it was a pretty bad store a couple years ago.
Indeed. And yeah, the star ratings are a good place to start as well. But you can see, so Icon Map is the visual that I'm going to use today. Icon Map has been around now for also nearly 6 years. It was one of the first visuals released into AppSource all that time ago. But the version that I'm going to use today was released just over a year ago. And as well as being able to add it here from the Power BI Visual Store, it also has its own website at iconmap.com, and you can go in here and download newer versions. So you can see since I released it last year, it's had a steady stream of new features, updates, and bug fixes all through that time. So if you want to take advantage of the latest editions, then I suggest going to download it from here rather than down from AppSource, which is always going to run a little bit behind. Because of the amount of effort it takes to publish the visuals in AppSource. I usually like to get a whole load of new functionality in before I then go through the process of having that updated. Probably worth mentioning actually while we're here, there's some useful blogs in here to take you through step-by-step doing things and instructions for using all of the different features.
I'll drop that down in there.
Thanks, Reed. Anyway, let's go back to building some demos before I use all of the time up by talking. So I'm going to add Icon Map onto my report. Let's make it a bit bigger. And let's start pulling in some of that flight data that I showed you a moment ago. So we've got this ID field. This is a unique ID for every row of data in the report. We've got longitude and latitude, so let's drag those in. And let's use the altitude as a size fields. So these are kind of the minimum fields that we need to be able to start plotting data onto the map. Actually, let's change altitude to average. So what we end up with is a whole load of circles on the map, but if we wanted circles on the map, then we could have used the Bing map or Azure Maps. Obviously, we want to be able to add pictures of planes, right? Not circles. So in order to do that, I go into the formatting options, and in here you'll see we've got objects, and I want to tell it, instead of showing circles, I want to show planes. And we can do that just by dropping in the URL of plane image I'm storing out on the internet, grabbing out from the internet into this field, and then we get planes appear on our map. So let's tidy this up a little bit. Let's make them a little bit smaller. Actually, before we start doing this, you remember I took a snapshot of data every 2 minutes. So there aren't this many planes flying into Amsterdam at any one point. This is kind of like the 24-hour picture of all of them. So let's just add a quick slicer and just pick one particular 2-minute slot in time. There we go. So these are all of the planes at that particular 2 minutes. All right, let's go back and continue tidying this up. Let's make our planes a little bit less transparent so they're a bit bolder on the map. Excuse me. So this is quite a nice start. We've got all of our planes on here with images. Now it's all the same plane icon, but you can see most of the formatting options in icon map support conditional formatting, so you can use that to show different images. You know, if we wanted a different type of plane icon for different types of plane, we could easily do that with conditional formatting. Let's sort out the direction of our planes. It looks like at the moment all of our planes are flying up to the North Pole, but we know they're not. They're flying either away or to Amsterdam. Now we had the heading in our data, so the compass bearing, the direction the planes are pointing. So if we rotate our images around that compass bearing, they should be pointing in the right direction. So I'm going to use conditional formatting here and pick that heading data. And now our planes.
First time I saw that one, I thought that was a really slick feature where you can incorporate data to actually, you know, make it move.
Yeah, it's much better. Obviously, if you've got any kind of asset tracking, you kind of want your icons pointing in the direction of travel. So we can see where our planes are, but we can't easily tell where they're going to at this point. So you can see also in my data, I've got the origin and destinations. So I pulled in, but this is, you know, the origin and destination, if you remember, in my data were just the ICAO codes, the 5-digit code or 4-digit code that represents the airport names. So I pulled in some open data of basically a list of every single airport in the world, and in there it has these 4-digit codes. Can't see them, but they are in there somewhere in the data. Here we go. These yeah, in the ident field. And against all of these, we've got the longitude and latitude of where those airports are. So if I now go back to my visual config and drag in those longitudes and latitudes into the field well, and it's defaulted to count for some reason, let's change those to average. Otherwise we just end up with a number 1, which is the point in the world down here. Now we get a line from our plane to their destination. But because maps are flat and the world is round, obviously these lines shouldn't be straight. They should follow the curvature of the Earth. So we can go into the formatting options and back down in options, objects again. We can change our line behavior from straight to geodesic, and then they follow the curvature of the Earth again. We can play with the formatting options of these. We can change the colors. We can change the width as well. It's worth noting that these widths also accept decimal values, so you can go super thin if you really want to. Change the colors in there, the transparency, or you can even do things like have weird and wonderful line patterns on your line. And again, all of this is configurable through conditional formatting. So if you want to represent, you know, I don't know, different things with different patterns of lines, you can do that.
So I mean, if you wanted to, in theory, like you could, because planes fly at different speeds depending on the, you know, metrics and everything else. So you could even have the lines somehow represent like upper, middle, and lower speeds for planes that are within certain ranges.
You absolutely could. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, while we're talking about lines, then obviously this is just a straight line from where the plane is now to its destination. But of course, planes don't fly in straight lines. They have to avoid weather systems or country boundaries or avoid war zones or whatever it is. So
Yes.
conveniently in this API, for some of those flights, it also contained the flight path, the intended route that that plane was going to fly. So if I go back to the flight data again, now what I've had to do is something a little bit nasty in my Power Query. So we've got one row here for every single plane every 2 minutes. And that's what the data is we can see here. But for those flights that also had a flight plan filed, I've duplicated that data. And you can see here, I've incorporated for just those flights, the flight plan in this waypoints field here. So you can see these are just series of longitude and latitude coordinates in a format called well-known text. So these can either be line strings or polygons or points, representing not just a single point on the map, but a whole series of points. So if I jump back to my formatting options, and here where I hard-coded that URL, I'm going to delete that out. We get our circles back. And instead, I'm going to choose that waypoints field. There we go.
The one downside I'll say is the of a lot of those little features with conditional formatting is choosing first and last lets you use implicit measures, and I'm sure you've had the pain point of that. As soon as you create a calculation group, then you have to go shotgunning a bunch of measures in your model, which confuses a lot of people. I wish there was a kind of a way around that, but it's always been a little pet peeve of mine is disable implicit measures, but still let it be used in conditional formatting
That's a good point.
menus. Just because a lot of people are just going to want it like, why is this red? Where is my first, last, min, max kind of thing?
Yeah, it's true. So yeah, you do need to create measures as well if you've got implicit measures enabled. Otherwise, you won't be able to do what I've just done. It does catch some people out sometimes. All right, so we've got some extra lines appeared, but it's a little bit difficult to tell which ones they are because we've already got all our original lines as well. So let's add some conditional formatting on here and use the rules. And let's say if that waypoint is an image, then let's keep them as black. But if it's not an image, then let's go bright red, make them stand out. So there we go. So we can see here where we've got those waypoints and our jagged lines. They're now shown in red. Interestingly, it seems to be all the transatlantic flights. They must have to file a flight plan, or maybe make that data available. I don't know. Anyway, we've got now two different types of lines, and we've got our planes on here, but they're a little bit difficult to see on this map background. So I'm going to change the map background. And I'm actually going to use one. So, well, Icon Map lets you pick from various different built-in map backgrounds. Or if you've got a Mapbox API key, which you can get from mapbox.com, you can use the Mapbox layers. But actually, I'm going to use one from Esri, using Esri's API, for which I've signed up. So I'm going to paste in their API URL in the custom background URL field. But to do that and stay within the terms and conditions, I have to add some additional legal text onto the map. So down here under map controls, you'll see there's this extra box for additional attribution. So I can just paste in the required text in there and it appears down at the bottom of the map, just to stay compliant. Okay, so that's a better map background. Let's see if we can add on a little bit more contextual information as well. So I'm going to, on top of my map background, I'm going to add on a custom overlay. So similar to the way we've just added on different background mapping, I'm going to add on some map tiles containing a live weather feed from openweathermap.org. In fact, let's set the transparency a little bit, paste in the OpenWeatherMap API URL, and you'll see that we get live weather feed on here as well.
Love it.
It's a nice clear day down here in the UK at the moment, but you can see we've got a bit of a storm system out here in the middle of the Atlantic. Okay, so the other thing I'm going to add on while we're here, though, is the daylight terminator. This is one of my favorite features on the map.
Yeah.
This
yeah.
shows
Mhm.
where it's day and where it's night. And the reason it's one of my favorite features, if you zoom in far enough, you can see that this actually updates in real time. So every second, this line will very slowly move across the map. Hopefully you can see that if I leave it on there far enough. However, of course, we're not looking at this data live. This data is from, well, it's actually from back in March, European format dates, earlier in the year at apparently 20 to 3 in the afternoon, when this daylight curve would look quite a lot different. So if I go back to the field well, you can see here I've got a field for daylight, date and time. And what that lets me do is drag in my time field in here, and then I'll just flip backwards and forwards just to make sure it refreshes off from being real time. And you'll see that the curve now looks completely different.
Yeah,
so
you're right. Okay.
let's do one more thing. I've lost my slicer now. There's a bit of an interesting issue with slicers in that sometimes, come back, done it now. Sometimes if you leave the slicer value selected and delete the visual, the slicer value still remains. So make sure that's unselected, and then I'm going to replace it with another custom visual, this one not one of mine, called the play axis visual, which I love for demos. Drag in our time bracket field. I'm going to change our visual interactions so that this visual will filter our map rather than highlight on it. We need to use the actual field, not the hierarchy. And then one last little thing, I'm going to change the interval that the play axis updates to fraction of a second, and then hopefully if I click play, or actually one more thing, so the map doesn't jump around all over the place and auto zoom into where the planes are, I'm just going to turn off automatic zoom on the map. Now if I click play on here, hopefully we'll be able to play back that 24-hour period and watch all of our planes fly in and out of Amsterdam. And you'll see some appear and some disappear. That just means that that plane didn't have any data at that 2-minute interval when I requested it. And you can see our daylight curve now slowly move.
Yeah, it's so fun to watch that, yeah. And I think I do see some planes sometime pop in and out. Is there certain rows where they exist and not exist?
Exactly that, yeah. It just meant that when I queried the API in that 2-minute interval, that plane wasn't picked, that plane's transponder wasn't picked up. If you're doing this in real life, you'd do some data smoothing, you know, and do some project.
Yeah, and you could use like the fill function or something, right? Like Power Query or something where you just have a master list of each ID, and you know you're basically probably joining on the data, and when there's not data, it fills down the previous value. So you'd see it moving, it might pause for a second, but it would stay there and it would just move forward when it has new data points.
Exactly.
Okay.
But obviously it's all a bit artificial, using the play axis and speeding it up like this. So
go ahead.
I had a bit of a play this afternoon, and I thought I would try and do this for real, right?
Okay.
So this is super high risk because I've never done this before in a session ever, because I literally spent a couple of hours this afternoon building this. Let's hope it's going to work, and let me walk you through very quickly what I did. So I've got Raspberry Pis, those little tiny computers that don't cost very much that you can run off a battery. Yeah. Well, it turns out that the same people who create that FlightAware API also, for free, provide software that will run on a Raspberry Pi, and if you plug in a antenna into it, you can actually record or grab from the planes above where you live or where your Raspberry Pi is, the transponder data live in real time.
That's cool.
So I've got my little Raspberry Pi running, and I'm actually able to track from the planes in the sky right now, pull out this little bit of JSON data that shows where the planes are. Now I could just pull this straight into Power BI and put the pictures of the planes on, but that's a bit dull because it wouldn't give us any history. So I wrote, again, a little bit .NET that grabs this data every 5 seconds and pushes it into an event hub in Microsoft Azure. And then with Stream Analytics, it squirts it into a SQL database. Super simple.
Yeah.
And actually, I could probably show you that as well, seeing as I've still got it open from building it earlier. So this is just a SQL table, right? So there's a row very similar to I recorded earlier. There's a time, and then the longitude and latitude, and some of the mixture of some of the data. So what I've got, if I can open it, is a Power BI report that uses direct query to point at that SQL database, which should be being updated every 5 seconds through my event hub. Okay. And then in Power BI, in the service, it's a Power BI premium feature. In desktop, anybody can use it. There's this option here called page refresh. And if you turn that on, you can choose that one or all of the visuals on your page can automatically refresh every few seconds. So I had a go at creating the map, pointing at that database, and hopefully, if this is going to work, give it a second to start drawing. There we go. It's starting to move. Let me, every 5 seconds, there we are. We can see some planes moving around. Every 5 seconds, we should see the planes automatically move on the map. And this is real-time streaming data. This isn't artificial in any way. This has been grabbed from a Raspberry Pi sat in my attic right now. And we're seeing, so I've been probably running this for the last hour since we've been chatting in the background. So I can probably go back, I'll probably go back 60 minutes, say. Slicer updates. And you can start to see the patterns in all of the different flight paths in that 60 minutes of data where I've been recording. Like you can see, there's a bit of a loop that the planes do here, flying into what I think is probably Farnborough Airport, for example, or the planes coming down or taking off from Heathrow, just outside London over here.
That's super cool. I like that a lot.
So yeah, so real-time map data in Power BI. Live, so real-time asset tracking, and yeah, took a couple of hours to build this afternoon, so it just shows how quickly you can build some of this stuff. It doesn't take
with the right skill set, of course, of actually using something to spit an API call in or a web scrape call into a database. But otherwise, yeah, the Power BI side isn't too difficult.
No, exactly. And I could probably not even use Stream Analytics or SQL and used their streaming data set or something and done it all within the Power BI toolset. But yeah, I didn't have a lot of time, and I only just had the idea a couple of hours ago, so I thought I'd give it a go. But
I think this adds a fun part to the element, and there was Matthias in the chat was actually asking, can you incorporate like streaming data into this? And they're like, there's not really like a get streaming data button in Power BI, but as long as it exists in a data source that you can then direct query against, then yes, pretty much any streaming data can be integrated. You just need to park the data somewhere first.
Exactly, yeah. And this is a beautifully simple way of doing it. Actually, it's probably worth just showing, actually, because basically we're grabbing the location of the plane every 5 seconds. You end up with quite a lot of rows of data for each plane. But of course, in order to display this on the map, we need one of those line strings that I showed before. It all needs to exist on the same row. And of course, this is where the magic of Power BI comes in. I'd never attempt to write this live in a session, but it didn't take too long for me to work this out earlier. We can use DAX's wonderful concatenate X function to basically generate that line string dynamically in DAX from all of those different rows of data and build a one long single string for each of the different planes. So how that works. And this, this doesn't have to be planes. It could be vehicles. It could be robots trundling around a factory floor or anything.
No, I very much appreciate it. Anytime a new demo goes well, the first time especially, Murphy's Law was not hit, and the demo gods are happy. So very, very
Yeah,
cool new
exactly.
incorporation I think you have into this, without needing to use the play axis, which
Yeah.
arguably, like, before we had the real-time page refresh, that's what we used to use.
It is.
I'm sure you built plenty of those. You'd put it into the background behind an image. It has to be unhidden because it won't actually run if it's hidden. But as long as it's just behind another visual, it basically does the same thing. I believe, actually, talking to the product team, that page refresh is essentially just toggling a fetch new data, which is what a slicer does anyway. It asks the queries make a request to get whatever latest data is available, but it's just not applying a filter. But we'd use a disconnected table with some rotating number of it could even just be one row, and all you have to do is say repeat, and it just cycles through, and it just does that indefinitely at the interval you set it at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, used to use exactly the same hack myself. I have a number of demos from days gone by doing exactly that, or not even demos. some production systems sometimes using that to trigger a refresh. All right, let's do something a bit different. I think we've done enough planes. Let's have a look at the other type of maps that I get asked to build most of the time. And actually, for you in the States, it's not too bad, because filled map works a lot better in America than it does the rest of the world. It at least understands some US geographies. But the problem we have in Europe is, well, apart from the fact that every country does everything differently, we have a million and one different ways of breaking up how we structure countries. So obviously we've got filled map, which allows us to view American states or countries. But if we want to get more detailed than that, if we want to draw the actual boundaries of our postcode areas, for example, then we can't do that in filled map. We have to resort to shape map, which allows you to load in your own files of your own custom boundaries, your own custom polygons, but there's no map background. So you haven't got a single visual that gives you the ability to show you your own shapes on the map, combined with the actual functionality of the map. So this is probably the other main use for icon map. So I'm going to demonstrate this with some crime data, which it's open data I've downloaded from data.police.uk, and it's basically a year's worth of London crime. So let me just show you what that looks like. So you download it from the website. It comes down in a zip file, which contains a folder for each month. And then, because there's two police forces that cover London, the City of London Police and the Metropolitan Police, we get a CSV file for each of those police forces. So let's load that into Power BI. And I'm going to use the folder data source. So we just pointed at that top level crime folder. And then when Power Query pops up, we can merge all of those different files into one long single table containing all of our crime data. Well, let me just walk you through very quickly what we've got in here. So we've got the month the crime occurred. Doesn't really matter which police force it's in. We've got longitude and latitude of the street where it occurred. We've got this location field, but it's not an actual address or anything. It's like on or near a park, or on or near a car park, or a supermarket, something like that. So we're not going to use that for now. We've got this field, which is the LSOA code. So this is like a statistical geography. It's bigger than a zip code or a postcode, but it's smaller than a local authority area. It's kind of like a grouping of postcodes used for statistics. So we'll keep that. That will be useful. We've got the type of crime, and then we've got these other two fields which we'll lose. And then, because I'm lazy and don't like DAX, I'm going to very quickly add a custom column called crime count, which I'm just going to hard code to the number 1, because each row in this data relates to a single crime. So I can just then sum up all of this data in my data set, which is the quickest way of doing it safely in the demo. But I wouldn't do this in real life. You'd create a measure. So this gives me quite detailed locations of where the crimes are. But in order to draw our custom polygons, I also want the local authority areas. So I'm also going to pull in one additional data source, which is just a CSV file containing a very simple lookup that takes this statistical LSOA code and says for each of those which local authority it relates to, or which London borough. So let's just use first row as headers and load that data in. Should only take a moment. There's only years worth of data. It's about 1 million rows, I think. So it's still, yeah, decent enough data source to use for a demo, but it shouldn't take too long to load. There we go. And I'm just going to create a relationship between those two tables on that LSOA field. Right, let's bring in icon map. I'm going to load it from the file just because it'll be quicker than using app source. Add it on, and then obviously we could, well, let's do this actually. Let's bring on the borough and the LSOA code. We're going to use crime count for the size, so we get a circle for each area. And then if I bring in latitude and longitude, we'll get circles representing each of those London boroughs at the top of my geographic hierarchy. And then we get this odd circle here in the middle of nowhere, which is for all of those records that didn't match a London borough because they occurred outside of London. So I'm just going to very quickly filter those out because we're only interested in London for this. Alrighty, but we don't want circles. What we want is our polygons. Now, there are a number of different ways of bringing polygons into icon map. Now, probably the easiest way is to host those polygons on either an external website or in something like Azure Blob Storage, which is what I've done. So I'm just going to configure the map, and my polygons are stored in something called GeoJSON format. We've got two levels, right? We've got our borough and our LSOA. So if I increase the number of levels to 2, I can paste in a file for the boroughs, and I can paste in a file for the LSOAs. And you'll see that those boundaries immediately appear on the map, but they appear behind the circles. So icon map now doesn't know whether it's trying to relate our location data, our London boroughs, to the GeoJSON file, or whether it's supposed to show circles. And its default behavior is to show the circles if you provide a longitude and latitude, because that's an individual point on the map rather than an area. We take the longitude and latitudes off, then it will relate the data to the polygons. So if I go in here and do conditional formatting and base it on a gradient, for example, of the crime count, then our polygons get colored by the amount of crime in that area. And you can see here Westminster is the London borough that's had the most amount of crime.
I like that. Okay.
And because we've got our hierarchy here where I've dragged on the 2 different location fields, we have drill down enabled. So I can turn drill down mode on, and we can drill straight into Westminster and see whereabouts in Westminster that crime has occurred. But it's also showing all of these other smaller polygons, all of these other areas outside of Westminster as well. If we want to hide those, we can hide the shapes with no data on here. So now we only get the polygons drawn in the area that we've drilled down to. It's quite hard to see though with this colored map background. So I'm going to change the map background a little bit like I did with the planes. This time use one from Ordnance Survey. There we go. So we've got a nice grey background, which helps our map stand out a little bit. This is called a choropleth map, where we draw these custom polygons and colour them based on the values in our data. So this is one way of doing it. And this works quite well where we're only drawing a small number of polygons. But the problem is if we have a really large amount of areas that we want to include on the map, then these GeoJSON files can get quite big. In fact, they can even become hundreds of megabytes if you've got really detailed polygons.
Yes, exactly.
And then it becomes, I mean, if you've ever tried to do this with shape map, you know, the visual slows down, it grinds to a halt, it's not really achievable. So we have another couple of options of doing this. One of those, if we've got use of a external map server, so something like Esri or Mapbox, a Mapbox subscription in the cloud, or an open source map server like GeoServer, we can use something called vector tiles. And in the same way as we load our map background tiles from an external server, we can also load our custom polygons from an external server. But instead of them being pre-built images, like our map backgrounds here with the word Chelmsford and all the roads marked on and already coloured, they just come out as a picture. Instead, they come out as vector shapes, which means the map visual can colour them on the fly based on the data in your Power BI dataset. So let's turn GeoJSON off and instead turn on our vector tile there. And again, we've got two levels. So if I paste in the URL of my external GeoServer, so straight away we get our local authority areas on there. And you'll see not only have I got London in here, I've got the whole of England, Scotland and Wales on here. And the advantage of using an external server for this is it doesn't matter how detailed our polygons are, the map server renders the shapes on the fly according to the zoom level. So we can have really detailed shapes for the boundaries of rivers or whatever it is we need and maintain that level of detail. And we can zoom in. Now there's a slight issue with this because we're requesting these background tiles. They could be anywhere. The map icon map doesn't actually know where they are. So if we drill down or filter to one, it doesn't know to move the map to go and find them. But we can give it a little hint by providing the longitude and latitude. But of course we get circles because that's the default behavior. But on our vector tile layer, we can say that we want to use our coordinates as the bounds or the center points of our location. So now if I drill down, it will zoom to those locations on the map. Now we've used the center point, so it's not going to be perfect, but you can provide the top left and the bottom right coordinates by using these destination fields as well, and then it will give you a much better experience. And the other advantage of this, of course, is we can, if I drill down all of it, we have no performance issues because it's not trying to load in 100 megabytes of all these tiny little polygons. I can quite happily, even at this really detailed level, show, takes a minute, because I've zoomed out so far for my map server, which isn't on a very big subscription. Give that a second just to load. You can see we've got all of those detailed polygons. So I can't remember how many there are, but there's tens of thousands of quite detailed little polygons, all happily being drawn on the map without hitting the performance issues that we would have trying to do this.
The rendering speed is impressive for sure.
Yeah, it works really nicely. Definitely the best way of doing this if you've got really large number of polygons that you want to include on the map. The only limit is the number of rows of data that you can bring into any Power BI visual, which is 30,000 rows. So it will happily let you color in 30,000 of these polygons at any one time. And the performance, even with 30,000, is absolutely fine.
Okay, excellent.
Alrighty, but conscious of time, but there's another issue of doing this. Obviously, we're still requesting data from an external service. Sometimes these actual polygons can be quite sensitive. Maybe they're your sales territories that you don't want your competitors to find out about, or even in the case of these police boundaries, they can change over time. So if we had I know, 10 years worth of data for our crime in London in the data set, those police boundaries may have changed within that 10-year period. And according to our, date slicer that we've got in our report, we might need a different set of polygons to show, depending, what date we picked. So the best way of doing that is to actually store the polygons themselves in the data set.
Okay.
So and conveniently, you can just store them in a text field, but actually SQL Server and Postgres and Snowflake all natively support something called geography data types. So I've stored in these police boundaries, or these LSOA boundaries in SQL Server. So I very quickly pull this in from an Azure SQL database. Let me show you this quickly. Just paste in the server URL. And I've got a table here for these polygons. And you can see for each of these LSOA codes, I've just got the polygon. So similar to the line strings that we've been using earlier, we've just got polygons instead. Exactly the same thing, lists of longitude and latitude points defining the boundary. If I load that straight in, give it a moment, and then of course I just need to create the relationship from the crime table to our new polygons, and I'll just do this quickly from scratch. So we're going to do lower super output areas by crime count, and exactly the same way as I did with those line strings earlier, I'm just going to use the conditional formatting to point at that polygon field. Let's give it a minute to initialize. Oops, what have I done there? I've used the wrong LSOA field, not the one I've just brought in, and my relationships aren't bidirectional. So that should work. It will give it a minute, and there we are, all of our LSOA boundaries.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Straight out of a data set. And of course, they'll be completely dynamic, so you can play around with them, according to slices, or do all sorts of wonderful DAX to do different things. And let's close this down, and I'll just spend a couple of minutes showing some pre-built ones in action, if I'm all right for time for 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So very similar data set. This is 20 odd years worth of house price data. So every single property that has sold in London over 25 years, and there are hundreds of millions of rows in this data set shown on this map, and we've got the same polygons in here. And of course, if I do this kind of thing, there's nothing to stop us drilling down into a particular area, or drilling through actually in this case. And then we can use visual interaction. So if I click on one area, then we can see the house price data over here, and for the same area, the crime data over here, and population demographics down here, in the same way as you can with any Power BI visual. But what I particularly like with this one is if I instead go to the detail, and not only now are we drilling down into these low super output areas that I was using earlier, I've actually drilling down into the individual properties themselves. So if I click map objects, you'll be able to see this a bit clearer. So in the same way as I loaded those LSOAs a minute ago from the database, I've actually got in my database every single building, every single tree, every park, every school, every river, every road, also in my SQL database. So all of these buildings you can see on the map are actually polygons in the database. So I can do things like report page tooltips to pull out the address of those buildings, or see that this one's St Mary's CVE school, for example. Or I can use the lasso tool and say, tell me the history of these individual houses, what's the selling price history of those houses. So there's some quite cool things that you can do by having all of that data actually held within the data set itself. And of course, you don't just have to stick with one type of object on the map at any one time. So let me drill in here. So in this data set, I've got all of the cable infrastructure for Western Australia. Just happened to be drilled into one particular place, but I've literally got the data for the whole of Australia in here. So you can see that I've got all of the cable infrastructure. So the dotted lines are underground cables, the solid lines are overground cables, and they're colored to represent the different voltages. And then I've got images on here as well. So these are just additional rows of data in the same data table for service pits or for electricity transformers.
Okay. Yeah.
And then similarly, there's one other thing actually I haven't shown, which is probably worth showing very quickly. So this is forest information. So all of the woodland in the UK is in this data set. So let me select one where I actually know there is some woodland. So this is Bracknell Forest, not far from Windsor. And I can do things that you'd expect. I can click a particular area of forest and see what type of trees it's made up from, or I can say, show me where all the trees have been felled in that forest. But I can also do things like change the map background. So the map backgrounds can also be configured by conditional formatting. So I've got a disconnected table, a bit like you were talking about earlier, and a slicer. This is just a bog standard Power BI slicer. And I can pick different map backgrounds. So if I choose, actually the satellite mapping is a good example. I've set it so that when you choose satellite mapping, it also changes the border color of the polygons using conditional formatting as well, so that they stand out against the dark background. Or we can do things like add on additional layers like CO2 concentration, which is obviously impacted by the amount of trees. So we can add on additional layers and do things like, a weather layer as well if we want to bring in wind or
I mean, like
all of those.
these are a lot of the features that people honestly like pay ArcGIS for, and with the proper setup and everything. Like there's so much you can do without having to spend a lot of money.
Absolutely, and it doesn't need to. You don't need to spend all of that money. And then last two very quick examples. Everything I've shown so far has been geographic coordinates, so longitudes and latitudes. But it equally works with image backgrounds and X and Y coordinates, where this is 0, 0, and this is the width and height of the image. So I can do things like, show me the route. So this is a line string, but with simple coordinates between here and, the theme park ride. Or equally with, maps that aren't necessarily spatial. So if you want to show real-time train locations, this is a fake one with play axis again, but drawing images of trains over the East Coast Main Line in the UK, for example. It's still icon map. A feature I haven't showed actually is labels. You can put text anywhere on the map as well.
Exactly.
Anyway, there we go. I'm right up for time.
This one's real. I really like the subway one a lot. I mean, but like it's pretty much your imagination is the one that is the limitation of this, with any icons that go on top of it and the directions for the turns and everything. So it is a very, very versatile visual. Clearly, as I'm sure everyone tuning in right now is observing on this. So I actually have a couple of questions that I wanted to put up. I answered a few, but could you do any type of a heat map using a point layer?
At the moment, no, but that bit of functionality is coming very soon.
Okay.
So now if you've used heat maps in Azure Maps, for example, or the Bing map, it's an either or. You can either have a heat map and nothing else. So what I want to be able to do is, as I do on a lot of the icon map options, is use conditional formatting to say whether that particular row of data is to be included in the heat map or not. And then you'll be able to have heat maps and images and circles and polygons all on the map at the same time. So that's the plan. That's why it's taken a little bit longer.
Excellent. Okay, that was from Mohammed. Let's see. We also have Gary had a good question I wanted to bring up. Can you add additional layers that a user could turn on and off to show circles for like crime spots over shapes, showing, as example, levels of deprivation, and add further layer to show like key locations or anything?
Yes and no. So you can obviously, if it's in your slicers, if it's in your data set, you can use a slicer to turn things on and off. But things like deprivation, if you've got those stored on an external server, probably haven't got enough time to bring it up. Give me 10 seconds, and I can show deprivation. So shame I closed the crime Power BI report down because I don't think I've got one saved, but that doesn't matter. Let me just bring up the flight data again very quickly, just to have a map. Always takes longer to load when you
presenting.
Yeah, right, here we go. I think I've got a map on page here. Right, let me just get rid of play axis. It's probably in the background. All right, stop. Right. Let's get rid of that. Right. If I zoom in to UK over here, the deprivation layer actually is quite conveniently being served by one of the UK government departments. So if I paste in, they host it on GeoServer, I think, which uses this open standard for tiles. If I paste in the URL of service and then say I want index of multiple deprivation, as it's called, and then I get a choropleth map in the background underneath all of my other data showing the deprivation levels. And I've chosen overall deprivation in this case, but actually you can of course use conditional formatting, one of those disconnected tables, to switch between different layers and pick particular types of deprivation if you wanted to. So that kind of thing is definitely possible.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. And let's see, what else do we got left in the chat? Greg coming in at the end with one. So actually, this is always good questions from you, Greg. If someone doesn't have a GIS system already, what are some good resources for drawing and labeling GeoJSON shapes for use as layers?
Yeah, good question. Not entirely sure off the top of my head. I know I've got a couple of support requests asking this exact question that I've not had a chance to have a look at yet this week. I don't know if it was yours. I will get back to you if it was. I'm sure if you Google it, there will be resources out there to create your shapes. Now I showed icon map using that well-known text format for the polygons, but it will actually accept GeoJSON in that same field as well. So if you can find online, even Google Maps will let you draw a polygon, and then there are actually website that's definitely worth me showing. So quite often you find this geographic data and it's not in the format that you need it in. There is a brilliant free website called mapshaper.org that allows you to very easily switch between different formats. So for example, if I drag in a GeoJSON file, so there's our London polygons. Actually, if you are working with GeoJSON files and they are hundreds of megabytes and you don't need all of that detail, you can use this simplify tool to reduce the complexity of your polygons. Now I've already done it on this one, but normally
that's nifty, and that's mapshaper.org.
Mapshaper.org, yeah. And then you can export to lots of different types of formatting. So even if you're using shape map, then you can export as topo.json and convert it into the format that needs, or GeoJSON for Azure Maps, or GeoJSON for icon map.
Excellent. I just popped that into the chat. That's a new tool that I've learned. So you can upload the original and just it auto scales. It starts to.
Yeah.
And the funny thing too is like it just makes me think of, because technically in the real world, like if you, depending on which book and anything else you look at, coastlines can have different lengths in terms of how many miles of shore there might be, because it depends on where they're rounding and how much they're actually accounting for. Like Washington State, we have a
Exactly. Yeah.
lot of little inlets, and I think as we've progressed forward, we've actually added more miles of coastline technically, because the surveys used to be so much more approximate, and when you round an edge, it's you might just take off a few hundred feet.
Yeah.
So I think our coastlines have actually increased in size over the last like 50 years as survey equipment has gotten more accurate from satellites to be able to actually map out coasts.
Exactly, and those files as a result, because they've got so much more definition in them, are so much bigger, and you probably don't need that in your Power BI report. So you,
generally speaking, no,
a lot of the time you end up down here in like 3% of your original file. You can literally shave off hundreds of megabytes and with no discernible difference at all.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
No, this has been fantastic, and I even learned a few new things today going through this stuff with you. Like there's a lot of features configurable in this. A couple people that I'd want to call out, I think, as some of the best mappers. Alice Drummond.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's what's her and her husband's business again? Remind me.
It's Discovery Eye. Yeah, and they've actually got a YouTube series on getting started with Icon Map as well. So if you want to get going with this but haven't used it before, really recommend finding Discovery Eye's YouTube channel and going through their Icon Map examples and tutorials. Really good.
Exactly. I think she's probably the go-to. I had her on a year or two ago where she went through a lot of mapping, and obviously just using your icon map for a lot of those examples. Carrie Kalasco does a good amount of mapping and visuals too, but those are two people that I can think off the top of my head who probably have spent the most amount of time doing blogs or videos showing some of the capabilities of maps in general and useful things with it. But I think almost very consistently using your tool to do lots of cool stuff. But she does Alice does a lot of stuff related to environmental, so she'll do water maps, and you'll actually see like I think of it as a heat map, but it shows the color saturation running along the rivers based off of flow rates, I believe, in certain spots. So you can actually see how much your little water is flowing in certain parts of Australia, and some other cool stuff overlaid on top of it. But it helps to really broaden the art of possible to show you what kind of things can actually be done with public data sets, especially with land and geospatial data.
Yeah, and especially in Australia, they have such a wealth of open data to be able to do all of this.
Exactly. But James, I appreciate you coming on, taking time out of your evening for this. This has been fantastic, and again, happy to finally get you on for this. I know you've had this tool around for a few years, and it still is definitely like the de facto map visual out there. And like with most external tools and custom visuals, they're often built because the individual has a need. Like, well, the stuff that's out there is kind of rubbish, and I have customers that need something, so I'm just gonna go and build reinvent the wheel myself because something else doesn't exist. Your tool has done that. I know with like Deneb is another great example of like a custom visual where it was built because initially Daniel had a need for something that could do what he wanted that just was not available. So it's great to see people like you who put that much time and love and dedication into something and then it ends up just becoming a staple of the community. So
yeah, well, appreciate you having me on. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to show it off.
Absolutely. And I do see one last question trickled in. This should be a really easy question, but I just want to pop that up and then we can wrap up. So Miguel just wants to know, is there any kind of like administrative authorization? So I'm going to guess like admin privileges or other stuff to install it in their Power BI or in the Power BI portal.
No, it's just a custom visual. So as long as custom visuals aren't turned off on your Power BI tenant, it's fine.
Exactly. Yeah, pretty easy to install. And I've met very few organizations that are super like locked in, especially if the visuals already in the app source and everything else versus installing one out of a file.
Yeah, and even if they are turned off, there's quite a large number of organizations now that have Icon Map installed as an organizational visual, so that their users can still use it even though other custom visuals aren't enabled. So exactly. There are ways of having specific visuals turned on.
Perfect. Then yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening. I will hope to get you back on at some point here in the future as well. Yeah,
Great.
and then otherwise I'll probably be seeing you somewhere on the network circuit in the next 6 to 8
Yeah.
months, I'd figure.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll see you at a conference soon. All right.
Cool, yeah, and
Cheers, Reed.
we'll all have
Enjoy your day.
exactly, and for everybody, just keep your eye on Build next week. James and I are certainly excited for that, so I'll continue to plug that. So, all right, cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next